Okay, here we are, ready to begin our actual painting. And what we're going to do is we are going to paint this so that it looks like a pretty rough and worn version of the weapon, though it's not going to be rusted or anything like that. It's not to be post-apocalyptic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my techniques, and then, like I said before, I'm going to then rush through the rest of the weapon, um, basically recording on time lapse. I'm going to record at a different frame rate that I'm going to play back. So the first thing I like to do here is I like to bring out my edges, which really helps define the volume of the gun. And if you look at any real gun or video game version of a gun, you'll see that this is usually most often done. So for that, we're going to make a new layer. Okay, I'm just going to call this edges. Make sure it's a TGA. And what I'm going to use is a stamp here. Okay, I want a white color. It really doesn't matter what color I use. And for this tutorial, I'm pretty much just going to use the standard stuff that comes with Mudbox. I'm not using any stamps that are custom made quite yet. I don't even know if I will use them. I do, however, have some custom stencils that I wanted to point out that I do have that I'll actually need to create, and one in particular is this burlap here that I'm going to use on the ammo box. Okay, and that's, you can see it's black and white. It's going to be part of the bump map, but for now we don't require anything but just the general stamp. So what I like to do is pick either this one, okay, you can see it here, or this one. And for the edges, it's really what it is simulating is scratches and being worn down the edge. So what I like to do is throw on randomize. I don't like to move the position. I only like to randomize the rotation. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on here, and what we want to do is we want to actually bring in a very small brush here. If we check our advanced settings here for our pen pressure, I'm going to zero everything. Minimum strength and minimum size are going to be 0. And then what I'm going to do is scrub along the edge here. Okay, I'm just scribbling, but I'm trying to maintain going on the edge. Now if you mess up and you go down the line a little bit like that, don't worry about it. Just fill it in. Okay, because it does look like a little bit of an extra scratch. And sometimes you want to get a little close here, but I'm just going to run through and highlight my edges. And you can see it's pretty noisy, and that's due to the randomization of the brush here. And this tutorial, I'm going to be a little more silent in this one than I usually am, because really once I explain what I'm doing, there's not a lot more to it. The only thing you don't want here, you can do little extra fill-in spots, okay, little diamonds and shapes like that, but what you want to do is you don't want to do any internal edges like inside here. I wouldn't do that, because that wouldn't, unless somebody ran, like a pin or a die right there or something, or it got hit specifically by the end of a nail that got ran through there, then it wouldn't really get scratched. But this would actually get a little worn out, and it's a combination of scratches and just general wear, atmospheric or whatever, it kind of oxidizes and things like that. But what this is really going to do, you can see that this is pure white. The only reason that I'm doing it in the diffuse and pure white like this is just so I can see what I'm doing. I will actually include this layer in the diffuse, but it's going to be toned way back. It's not going to be very apparent. Where it's going to be its most apparent is actually in the specular, because what you got to remember is that for the most part, in most materials, plastics, metals, rubber, cloth, even skin and things like that, the base color defines a lot. However, it actually kind of plays a minor role when you compare it to the effect of the specular map, and that's that's where this is really going to be. I'm going to duplicate this layer, I'm going to stick it in the specular map, and then I'm going to basically keep it white like this. This one I'm going to probably set it to overlay and turn the actual strength of a layer down to like 30 or 40 or something like that. Now when I get to these actual corners, one of the things I like to do is actually fill in each of the three corners a little bit, let it cross over, okay? Just make kind of like a little triangle right there in that corner. And really you can just kind of scrub out like a little circle. And again, you really just got to get used to your pen to maintain the, cleanness on this. Anybody who's gone to Rat's Army and seen the speed paint of the MP40 will see me do this. And this is usually my first step because it does two things actually. It basically gets me started with my textures. It also defines the model, because Mudbox does not support smoothing groups, so it can actually be sometimes a little difficult, especially on a darker model like this. Sometimes it might be a good idea to actually shut off your base layer if your base layer is really dark. However, if your lighting isn't something that your eyes can adjust to very easily, it might be better to have that on. But you can see that the wireframe is basically a dark gray, and with the weapon being a dark gray too, it kind of can make it a little difficult sometimes to see. So if you need to, just shut layers off so you can see what you're doing better. Remember that the purpose of what we're doing is not, I'm not going to paint the whole basic gun here. I need to actually lean over so I can get this thing. And the other thing is use stroke directions that you are more comfortable with. Rotate your model if you have to. You just hold Alt and left mouse. Now if you want to actually turn it, you can hold Alt and Control and left mouse. And some people find it easier to do vertical strokes than they do horizontal. I'm actually one of those people. It's just from years and years of being an illustrator, basically my whole life. I've always turned a paper constantly. I flip it upside down. I turn it on the right hand side, and sometimes I'm rotating from the wrist. Sometimes I've got my palm planted and I'm basically using just my fingers. Other times I use my whole shoulder, the whole arm to pass across. Depends on the length and type of stroke. I found that sometimes it's easier, if you do have issues getting it, is instead of trying to follow the stroke like I'm doing here, where I'm actually scrubbing back and forth on it, to sometimes actually crosshatch past it with very small strokes as you move your hand down. See, I'm going like that, where it's really slow. I'm going up, down, up, down, up, down, but then sped up. Okay. But for me, these are actually okay, and you want to actually work kind of close, just so you can really see what you're doing. And I'm going to do this whole piece, and then I'm going to swap over. I'm going to actually stop this video and change the recording to be time-lapse, and I'm just going to rage through the whole thing, because like I said, for this type of thing, there's really no reason for me to just show you everything. If I come to a part where I feel I should probably explain what my change in technique is, then I will definitely come back. Now if it's hold Control and Alt here, and I can just bring it back to horizontal there. But I'll definitely put the video back into real time and actually talk over it. I don't like to record videos and then talk over them later. It just doesn't. I just don't really do that. It feels weird to me. I like to basically speak while I'm doing it, which can kind of fall back because I lose my train of thought, because while I'm trying to explain what I'm doing, I'm also trying to do what I'm doing, and this kind of thing can take a little bit of concentration. Not this in particular. I'm really just scrubbing along these defining edges here, and that's pretty much the extent of it. And anytime you want to reassociate your camera, just put your mouse somewhere and hit F, and it'll center it there. So now I can rotate around this piece, make it nice and easy for me to. Oops, see, I messed that up. If you don't have your Wacom at the right angle, sometimes your stroke can go wild. It's just Control Z, you know. Anytime you mess up, no biggie. Or you can use the erase tool or whatever you wanted to. Now this piece here, on a lot of the M60s, they're metal, you know, which would get this basic same treatment. However, in this case, just want to explain a little bit about my project. I am using this in my project, and this gun is actually basically the size of like a toy, like a for an action figure. Like imagine like a GI Joe's, what, like 3 inches tall or something. My characters are really tiny little soldiers, so I'm actually doing this for them. So I'm gonna put a couple probably extra plastic pieces on this that wouldn't necessarily be plastic in general. But the second reason that I'm doing that, you know, scale is one of them, but the other one is just so I can, you know, if I did the whole thing just, you know, black metal, it'll look good in the end, but it doesn't make for that great of a training tool. You know, I mean, it doesn't explain anything. I'm just going through and making the metal here. And what I'm kind of considering now that I'm actually doing this would be just to finish this piece instead of going back and forth and saying, okay, I'm going to speed paint this whole thing. Maybe I go back and forth and I just finish this piece right here, and then I go to speed painting. I'm not sure. I haven't decided yet. I haven't actually finished this yet, so I might just go through. I usually like to do what I'm doing, like, you know, right here I'm bringing out the edges. I usually like to finish that on the whole weapon before I move on to any other theory, which would be, you know, like the base specular or the dirt or anything like that. Because we're going to have edges, we're going to have a base specular, which is going to be kind of a worn look, and I have a pretty decent technique for that. Theory anyway, it works. It comes out pretty good. Again, the other thing I want to point out is that this is actually designed for the material system that is actually present in the UDK engine. If you're using a different engine that might be deferred rendering or has a different system of lights, or if you're doing this for Max or Maya or XSI or whatever, Blender, that you're going to render this in, you know, you may need to adjust your contrasts and things to fit your lighting or whatnot. But this, you know, inside of UDK, using its particular type of dynamic lighting and stuff, these actually come out pretty good. They look good in a first person view, and they look pretty good in third person view when you're just sitting there. You know, you bring the lights around them. They don't look too bad. You can see I missed it here, but I'm not undoing it, you know, because it's not going to hurt anything. On the one hand, this is an important step, but on the other hand, it's actually quite a subtle effect on the weapon. However, it does tie things in, and without it, the gun just ends up looking a little bit more flat. And like I said, this is really just an edge highlighting that I'm going to use in the specular map to really bring this guy out. And some of this stuff is actually going to get a little washed out, and a lot of these angles you're probably never going to see. I'm actually going through and doing it in basically in the spirit of being thorough, and that way it can be inspected from any angle. I can use it as a showpiece if I want to, you know, if I pull screenshots on, and hopefully, you know, it shows the end user who's, you know, basically average Joe, right? That, hey, you know, that looks pretty good. You know, he may or may not know how it was created, but as long as it doesn't, you know, stand out as being like, what, you know, what the hell's that? You know, this looks like, you know, that looks like fur or something. Then you know, then you fail your job. But, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, you're not working for the for the 3D artist, because every 3D artist is gonna be able to easily just rip it to shreds. I mean, I can usually rip almost everything to shreds, even though, you know, not in every case can I do better. I can at least point out what they didn't, you know, potentially do right, and it's just kind of the natural thing to do, is really, and not a it's not in any way insulting the other artist. You know, it's not saying, hey, you're an awful artist. It's just like, hey, you know, I'm just kind of, it really just shows that I think about how things are done, so that way I can do them myself, whether or not I feel better or at least on par with these things. Because if you don't, if you don't go out there and see and learn as much as you can, you're not going to be as good as you possibly can. You may be extremely good, you know, sitting in a room all by yourself, never experiencing the world, but that same person that eventually does go out and experience the world is going to be in him, you know, compared to his own self, is going to be a lot better, because all of a sudden doors open up that he never possibly thought about or whatever. So hopefully, you know, even the experienced people can get a little out of this, see what I've done. I'm sure that there's people out there that can do a much better job. If you take a look at games like Battlefield 3 and whatnot, their textures are really good. You know, I've pretty much inspected them through and through, and it does. They do use some of these things that I've got going on here. You can see here I'm kind of crossing over here just to make it so that this has been kind of whacked right there, or slid along the ground. He's put the gun up on a concrete wall and shot it, and all that friction from the recoil and all that's kind of worn it out. And I could, you know, just get a couple extra scratches there, real light, real subtle. Okay, you know, he put the gun down, you know, and it got scraped up, and he's put it down hundreds and hundreds of times, because he uses this gun every single day. You know, you want to think about that while you're doing these things. Where would it get scratched? You know, back here, you know, inside here, it's really not going to get scratched all that much. It's not going to really get worn out. It's protected by this surface. You know, this surface is the one that's going to take all of the brunt of the hits. It'd be a pretty rare angle that take physical damage, you know, from just placing the gun down, and literally just placing a metal object down, as minor as it is, and especially as heavy as weapons are, and considering that they're out in a field of, you know, combat, whether or not it's combat or just everyday use, depending if it's, you know, if it's the jungle, it's going to be grimy, you know, if it's the city, it's going to be dirty, dusty, and scraped, you know. So just think about the theme of your and the location of where your item's going to be showing up, and do it for that, you know. It may be that, you know, you have to do this another time because, oh, this is an outer space, or, you know, this guy's a little, you know, micro cosmonaut, and he's got an M60 and he's traveling through the bowels of a giant creature or something, and so it should be covered in visceral goo, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, just do it for your theme. And my particular theme is this is a tiny miniaturized weapon, but however, it is a fully functional weapon, and to you, being that tiny little guy, it's a full-size weapon. However, in reality, it's not. It's very small. It's maybe an inch. So that's really the edging there. If I turn back on my base here, you can see that it's stark, you know. It's very contrasty there. But you do obviously get the effect. And you can see that I've been very messy with it. And that's actually part of the point. It's random chaos inside of here. It's the whole reason why I'm using a stamp in the first place that's randomizing it. And I purposely don't try to maintain... I don't use the steady stroke and try to go dead on there. I allow it to trail away from the lines. Okay? I purposely trail away from the lines. You know, I move up and down. The only thing I do want to do is just keep it continuous. Okay? I'm actually scrubbing above the line a little bit and then below it, then above it and then below it. And sometimes just my hand just goes a little farther and I work that into what it does. I just fill it in. The only thing I want to avoid is a separation like that. If I get that, I fill it in. Okay? It was where it took a bigger hit. You know, it's where it more consistently makes contact with a surface that would rub off this finish. Okay? Now, the thing is, you know, if this was paint and the gun underneath was black, you would make this black. You know, your paint would be lighter than this, but in this case, it's black gun that's been scraped. So what I'm doing is bringing out these highlights. So before I go into the speed paint of this whole thing, I'm going to show you what it's going to look like with the end result. And the other thing, I want to give you a little hint here, tip, is if I go to my select and move tools and I pick faces and just blow my brush out, and then I just hit H. That's not in the way anymore, so that's a nice thing. So I can shrink my brush down here and hit F, and I kind of the amount that you zoom in is actually based on your brush size. So if I hit F with it really small, if I make a really big brush and I hit F when I'm pointing at something, it zooms out. If I make it really big and hit F, it zooms way out. So it's based on your brush size. And again, if you know you accidentally lose your gun and you're scrolling around and you don't know where it is and you're trying to look all over the place, just hit A. It'll always just kind of reset the camera back to where you want, and then you can hit F. You point at something and hit F, and you'll highlight over that, and it'll rotate around that point. Pretty nice feature. Okay, I'm rotating right around there. You can always get up under all these angles. So what I need to do is I need to turn this into the specular map. And let me show you just real quick before I do that. I'm going to turn this to overlay. You can see instantaneously it's pretty much toned back. Okay? It's just now kind of a light gray. But for now I'll keep it at normal. And I need to bring this to the specular channel. However, I don't have a specular channel. So if I duplicate this, I double click the name here. I'm going to call it edges underscore spec. Okay. There's no option here to say turn into specular. So what you got to do is you actually have to create a new layer, excuse me, and make it specular here under the channel. That way you actually activate that channel, and you'll see that there it is. And now I can just drag this right there. Okay. Now I can take this original layer if I want. If I'm never going to paint on it, I can just delete it. Sometimes it won't let you. You have to activate the actual channel. Okay, then it let you delete it. Now if I hide the edges here, you can see that at certain angles, right here, there's really no edging because it's in the specular lighting. Now if I turn it down, then it shows up, but then it goes away again. Okay, that's specular, and that is what we need. This is not an advanced part of the tutorial. However, if you're new, this shows you the power of the specular channel. Okay, look at that right there. There's not really a lot going on. As soon as I turn it, there it is. But if I'm here and I just hold L and then I move around, you can see I can highlight it by moving my light. Okay, and that is what we are after. We want it to show up at certain angles only. Other times it doesn't look all scraped up. It looks clean. Okay, you can see that there. And that is our goal. So now what I'm going to do is I've got a lot of work here. I got to go through and get all of this stuff. And again, like I said, I'm making this plastic. This guard, I'm making plastic. Which the good news is plastic is a material that is the same throughout. Think of a gobstopper, and then think of like an eraser. You cut an eraser in, you know, down the middle, and it's still pink all the way through. The outside and the inside are both pink. However, metal might be sprayed a particular finish. The metal may be black through and through, but it may not be. It may be paint on the layer, and the underlying metal is actually silver, because in general metal's kind of a silver, unless it's, you know, brass or whatever, or gold or whatever, you know. But for the most part, the most recognizable color of metal, steel, and things like that is is a grayish silver, you know, and it's the specular highlights that really bring it out. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to assume it's kind of a paint layer. And again, if I bring my edges in here and I turn this to overlay, it just kind of enhances it a little further, makes it a little brighter. And brighter means more of a reflective surface. It means a shinier metal. Okay? Now this is just, again, stark, you know, flat color here. There's no other information. Once we combine it, once we combine it with other information, then the whole package will start to come together, and you'll see that when I move on to the next phase here, basically. So again, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to go into time lapse. I'm going to complete the edging in time lapse, and you can basically watch along. And when I say time lapse, I mean I'm actually slowing the camera down. Okay, I wanted to point that out to everybody, that I work 10 times faster than this time lapse is actually going to be showing, and I'm actually slowing the camera down so that you can see, you know, a little bit clearer what I'm doing, because otherwise if I didn't slow the camera down, it would just be a blur, and really it's because I am that good.